Hello, welcome to Free Will, Science, and Religion. I'm Chandler Klebs, and I'm here with Mitch J. and George Ortega, and I had an interesting idea that was very free will related, and it was actually inspired by what I have been reading related to asexuality, because I've been reading blogs and website, free FAQs about asexuality, and I've been reading like a free PDF book I downloaded from one website. And here's what caught my interest on almost every website. Here's how they define the difference: is that they say, like asexuality is a sexual orientation, whereas celibacy is a choice. And what's really bad about it is they just leave it at that. Like, well, one's a choice and one isn't. And it's very it's hard to know precisely what's meant by that. But I did post in a Facebook group about this, and I was getting some very weird comments. People, the usual hatred of anybody who mentions, the lack of free will and the lack of choice thing. But here's what I want to get at is that, yes, there is a difference, but it's not that the difference is as simple as something called choice, because choice, I think, when used in that way, tends to, in the minds of many people, makes room for this idea of free will. Like that, well, you are not to blame or credit for having a certain sexual orientation, but if you act on that desire that you were born with, or whatever, for whatever that was caused by, well, then you are responsible and we can blame you. And you guys get what I'm saying, how they do that.
So Chandler, I mean, before we get into this, explain more precisely the difference between asexuality and what, I guess, celibacy?
Yeah, and here's because I've read quite a bit on the subject, and basically, asexuality is where people, they are just not experiencing sexual attraction. Like in the way many people, they know that they are sexually attracted to somebody, and so they identify as, as heterosexual or homosexual or bisexual and those kind of things. But asexuals are unique and that they don't ever feel that about anybody of any gender. And this is very interesting because it is a minority. The statistics I read, they usually say about 1% of the population is this way, but for many of them, they're just like, it's sort of like a lot of them, I don't know, they're just not interested in it. They just,
Actually, Chandler, it's actually there's a stage of childhood where that happens. Like I think infants are sexual, then sexuality goes into a dormancy. I don't know around what age, then it reemerges in adolescence. So actually, we all have this period of I guess asexuality when where we just don't have sexual drives, orientations, urges, whatever.
yeah, here's what's interesting about it is, how, for example, to a lot of kids, somebody will mention something related to sex, or they'll learn something about it, and to them it's just gross, right? Or it's just confusing because they don't understand and they're just trying to figure out why would people do this and why is it so important. But for a lot of people, they hit puberty and then there's all these hormones, and then all of a sudden, then they feel these urges and desires. Most of the population does, but there are people for whom that just never happens. And the difference, like between the asexuality, like I just explained, they're just not feeling the way that most people are. But then celibacy, I would say it's more of a thing like, well, I don't want to have sex because this or because that. For example, there are celibate priests, for example, who, well, they're straight. They do have their sexual desires, but because their religion, for example, tells them that they have to be celibate to be priests, and a lot of religions, they promote celibacy or abstinence as like this religious ideal that brings them closer to God. It is for that reason that they have one desire that is trumping another desire.
Right. So in this case, as in all the cases that we're interested in, that we talk about, the issue is people who have not investigated free will and come to the conclusion that, well, even before they come to a conclusion, people who have not investigated the idea of free will misunderstand the way the world works. So in this situation, if we want to accurately describe what we're talking about, the difference between celibacy and asexuality, right? The way we would put it is this: you you might have sexual desire, but you don't control the fact that you have sexual desire. Or you might be a person who does not have sexual desire. And that's all you can say, right? So you either have these urges or you do not have these urges. But there is no um, there is no room for any kind of control. So when people are trying to describe this, when people are trying to define things, which I think is one of your main points, Chandler, a lack of understanding about the issue of free will, or the non-existence of free will, rather, causes a lot of confusion and is very problematic.
Yes, I agree there because I think just by using the word choice as they often do,
Right.
they have this idea, well, you could have chosen otherwise, that you could have your own accord chosen otherwise. And that, I mean, I don't know if that's what everyone's thinking, but because we live in a largely free will believing world, that's my guess is that many people think that is, and the fact that people are blaming people for that, for what they do or what they don't do, leads me to think that there is a free will belief based blame system, and blame and shame regarding sexuality, or even sometimes the lack thereof.
Okay, but yeah, as Mitch was, I think, explaining, basically one, kind of like presents itself, sexuality, celibacy or not, presents itself as a quote unquote choice. Even though that choice isn't up to us or may not, in a certain sense be up to anything, it does seem like, one perspective in it is like, we can decide to be sexual or not. Whereas, like, the asexuality, we the person doesn't experience that decision. Like, for example, I think breathing, I think is a good analogy. Like, we don't, I don't think, get to decide whether we want to breathe or not. We might want to try to stop breathing for a little while, and like we realize that, wait a minute. So like, or just like a lot of the autonomic, the what happens in our body, all our body. I mean, it's like we don't decide. There are organs work, that our, biology works the way it does. It just does. It doesn't, so again, like, so, I think the problem is like, so people are just like grasping at a way to try to just like, restore, maintain this idea of free will. And yeah, I mean, the clear point here is that, what they're not getting is like that. Yes, certainly, what's not in our control in terms of sexuality or not, being asexual, that obviously can't be freely willed. But what we say, over and over in these episodes, and what this whole debate is about, isn't even about that. It's about like these quote unquote choices that seem, in a sense, up to us. So again, like, I think the point here is that this trying to use autonomic and quote unquote voluntary processes to present a case for free will is just like missing the entire you know the entire point of the debate, and the entire intent of it, or the substance.
Yeah, I agree, George, because what they're missing is that, for example, some things are just automatic and our body does them, like the breathing thing, or and the desires. That's just the way it is, and there is no thought process. There's no process of deliberation that people even experience about those things. And for the other so-called decisions, well, there is a conscious process where the person is thinking about what they're going to do. And we already know that they're going to do whatever is the strongest desire and all the influences of their genetics and environment up to the present moment. So we know that they believe that it's undecided at that point, even though their subconscious has already computed the outcome, and then they become aware of it.
Agreed. So just to clear this up for any listeners who might have gotten a little bit sidetracked, what we're saying is that an asexual person does not have the typical sexual desire or has no sexual desire. Free will advocates, however, might argue that a celibate person is demonstrating free will because the celibate person wants to have sex, but somehow doesn't do it. So the celibate person is invoking free will by stopping himself or herself from doing what that person wants to do. But as Chandler, so aptly described a little bit earlier, it's about competing urges, competing interests. Yes, the celibate person has sexual desire, but the celibate person also has other interests and desires that may conflict with that sexual desire. And there's no choice being made. These competing urges simply compete, and one of them wins out. So if that person has the brain of a very logical person, perhaps that person decides it's illogical to have sex, and that logical foundation is so strong that it overcomes that urge to have sex.
Yes.
Right. And with this whole issue, so like, I think, there's different kinds of ways of understanding why we don't have a free will. And the competing motivations is certainly one of them. There's different motivations within us. That might not be so easy for some people to understand, because then they might say, well, wait a minute, we have two competing motivations within us, but aren't we like, don't we freely will what these motivations are? I don't know. They might want to like bring it back a level. But I mean, like, what's the big mystery is that, you know, aside from the motivation, I mean, motivation is also a causal process. So basically, what refutes free will is this simple process of causality, and this is our challenge. I mean, people, even like PhDs, don't understand causality. A lot of them think they do. A lot of them really they've written books professing that they do. But like to believe that you understand causality and to argue for a free will really is to either completely misunderstand what this free will question is about, or to just not understand what causality is about. So maybe,
Agreed.
yeah.
It's also a gross violation of Occam's razor. That's I think that's another big thing, because people, free will advocates, free will believers, they are adding something extra to what is known. They are adding an additional assumption to the universe. Like we see, we're very used to mechanical devices. We're used to the machines that we make, whether they're simple machines or complex machines. So we understand the mechanistic aspects of reality. We understand how dominoes works and how ticking clocks work. But the free will advocate says there is something extra, and they have no proof for it. So this is another thing that needs to be addressed. There's a burden of proof. There's an onus on that person who is advocating for free will to demonstrate, first of all, to define what free will is somehow clearly. Secondly, to demonstrate what kind of evidence would be sufficient to show there is free will. And thirdly, to link it to the reality that we live in. I mean, without having satisfied these conditions, one must operate under the assumption that there is no free will, or the universe just works the way it does work due to, as you said, causality, cause and effect, just how every other mechanism that we understand works.
Yeah. So, Mitch, what you're saying is people are claiming there's a ghost in the machine, basically.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's exactly it. But the thing is, what should the default stance be? By Occam's razor, we should be operating under the hypothesis with the fewest assumptions. So why by default do, because that's how most people approach the issue, right? Most people approach the issue. When I say most people, I mean people who are open-minded but feel like people who are not convinced that free will is bogus and feel like neuroscience or theoretical physics has to come up with evidence to demonstrate that free will does not exist. It's the other way around. The burden is on them to demonstrate it does exist. So I think this is a confusion of the issue, a confusion of the burden of proof. Who does it lie on?
And I think it's just like, we kind of like, we go through life assuming that people are intelligent, that if you get a PhD, especially in psychology or philosophy, you know how to think, and we can't, that's an assumption that, that this whole issue of free will just completely, destroys. I mean, like, I think what's happening is like people have such a strong need to believe that they are in control of their actions. Otherwise, their life would be meaningless. This woman who comes to our Manhattan meetup, she said, "Well, if I knew that I didn't have free will, I'd kill myself." I mean, like, so a lot of people have this very strong emotional need to believe in free will, and I think that's what that's part of our challenge. In other words, like, if either, I mean, it's one of two things. One is that they either are just not that intelligent, because how could you not get that causality makes free will impossible, and how could you not get that if you try to challenge causality and you end up with things not being
George,
caused?
just to be fair, I don't mean to kind of I just want to make a small point. Just to be fair, it is I mean, this issue, right? It used to be solely in the realm of academia. It was a scholarly issue. Like you said, there were philosophers and psychologists and great thinkers were the ones who thought about this issue. And it's only been, very recently that's been in the zeitgeist where it's been popular for people like yourself and for Sam Harris and Richard Orton, other
Well,
hard
Mitch, no,
determinists.
I don't agree with that, because, like, I think, like, like these late night college conversations, people go to school and college, free will is like, it's the most written about topic in philosophy,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
a
but
lot of
what I'm saying is I don't think it's been very approachable until recently. Just like how there's been this new atheism movement, right? There's been atheistic movements since the beginning of human history, but there's been a new surge of energy
all right,
thanks to the proliferation of information through the internet and stuff. So I'm saying in the case of free will, like for me, for example, I never really before, I never really investigated the issue of free will. I never invoked it. I didn't really have one. I didn't have a horse in the race. But I was able to digest the issue because a new wave of writers came along that took it out of the realm of academia. So I can see how it can be confusing because there are some people that I engage with, I have conversations with them about the issue, and I can tell after a few minutes they are not getting it. And this is the kind of person who is not going to be able to get it. They're just
uh,
not
but Mitch, I
in
think
tune with that kind of
my
thinking.
stronger point is that there are a lot of academians, there are a lot of PhDs who don't get this, who are familiar with the issue, who know what the issue is about, who
Yeah.
know, what the players are and what the arguments are. And, like, again, there's only two possibilities. One is like, all right, these people may know how to learn, but they certainly don't know how to think. And the second possibility is like, all right, they know how to think, but they're not the most ethical, moral people, because basically, like, to be a scientist, a philosopher, I think ethics compel you to be objective, to not impart your personal needs and desires and, worldview into what you explore. And clearly, these people are opting to go with what they emotionally need, to the extent they understand logically free will is impossible. And that's like so disingenuous. That's like, that's it's just immoral. So, like, and that's a huge problem that we, who are trying to, like, lead the world to this new consciousness face. We have to find a way to reach those people.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
Sorry.
oh yeah, and a word about emotions is that, there's some emotion behind everything, really. Like, sometimes, people talk about the idea of, being rational and leaving emotion out of the equation, but what kind of human is capable of doing such a thing? Is there
Well,
any?
Chandler, no, come on. I'm like, 2 + 2 = 4. I mean, give me a break. That's not an emotional, that's a completely logical, um, construction. You
But
know what
like
I'm
you
saying?
said, George, there's a series of it's bias. It's human bias, of course. Like take Daniel Dennett for example. Daniel Dennett is a famous philosopher, one of the four horsemen, one of the linchpins of the new atheist movement, but he's also a renowned compatibilist. He's been entrenched in compatibilism. That's a thing he's written about for a long time. It's a big part of his career and his writings and what he does. When people talk to Daniel Dennett, they're either talking to him about atheism or compatibilism. Those are the two main things he's talking about. So imagine, the embarrassment it would be for someone in that position, someone who is otherwise very reasonable and very respected, to have to admit, I was completely wrong. One of the main things people have cited me for, is completely wrong. I've guided all these people in the complete wrong direction, and I'm not as smart as I thought. You know what I mean? It's hard to take. So I think part of the goal that we have, if we can link this back to the original topic for a second, because free will doesn't exist, we can't blame people. So our only option, really, if we want to make a change, is to help people. Helping people is logical. Helping people see your side of the argument, guiding people, making them feel like they don't need to be ashamed about being wrong. Make them so. For example, my background is in mathematics. In mathematics, when you work on a problem, you are wrong all the time. You are constantly being wrong. Mathematicians talk to each other, they go, that's wrong, that's right, that's wrong, that's right. Like sort of like the example you gave about 2 plus 2 being 4 or whatever. And we don't feel any way about it. You don't feel bad when you get it wrong. In fact, the fact that what you got was wrong is just as rewarding as it being right. So I think that's another goal that we should aspire to achieve. We need to guide people and empower people, make them appreciate reason and compassion, show them the world is, get rid of these fatalistic thoughts and make it easier for them to absorb the true nature of reality.
Yeah. And the thing is, like, it's true, like George pointed out, two plus two is four, and that's obviously true. But I think what we're getting at is that people don't have an emotional need for two plus two to equal nine, as far as I know. At least I don't have that emotional need, you know. So I guess perhaps there are some subjects we are able to just realize, well, this is the facts, but we don't have emotions that cloud it. But in other areas, like what Mitch pointed out about Daniel Dennett, like if he's been writing books promoting this compatibilism for all this time, well, it's yeah, it is a big blow to him to have to admit that he was wrong about something. But here's the deal: if he truly understands, if I mean, look, if he truly understands determinism, he would know that it wouldn't be his fault that he was wrong, and he wouldn't feel bad about it.
That's a good
That's kind
point,
of funny.
Chandler. That's a good point. So, like, in other words, like this clouded reasoning that comes about from their emotional need, they have, like, I think Dennett has a very strong emotional need to believe we have a free will. I think he's one of these people that, like, if we didn't have a free will, if we were just puppets, oh my God, life is meaningless. So like, um, you're right. So, like, so he can't really get to that point of accepting that we don't. I mean, he has actually. I mean, if you read some of his writings and listen to some of his debates, at times he is kind of like moved by the other people, by Harris and all, to admit that we don't really have control over anything. But like then, like in the next line, but he'll still say, but we have free will. It's a kind of like illogic that boggles the mind. And I think one avenue we may have is, like, these guys may need to choose between being right and being moral. If they value morality, they have to understand the disingenuousness of continuing to argue for something that is increasingly being understood contrary to the position they're holding. And, like, it's an immoral position that they're it's a matter of morality also. In other words, it's not just getting it right or wrong.
Yeah, and guys, here's what's important is that the way I feel about this, knowing that there's no free will, I find that it's immoral to blame people for what isn't their fault. So, because of that, and it helps to keep me from blaming people when I meditate on this, realizing that nothing was up to anybody, um, then I find it almost immoral to just let people go on believing in free will because of all the blame and the shame that that does to people.
Well, but Chandler, the free will belief causes so much harm. I mean, based on what you were just saying, if the entire world understood that nobody has a free will, it'd be pretty impossible for one person to become angry at another person. They might become angry at what happens, what a person quote unquote does, but they couldn't be angry at another person. So here's another thing we're challenged with. There's a lot of scientists, a lot of neuroscientists, especially now, who are getting that we don't have a free will. But there's levels of intelligence here. There's levels of understanding. So like they get that we don't have free will. They are like really far from understanding the profound implications of this truth. A lot of them like would say, fine, all right, we don't have free will, but it really doesn't mean anything. No, it could, it couldn't
Yeah.
mean more to the world.
So I just wanted to make a quick point before. I don't know how much more time we have for this lecture. I just wanted to link it back to the original topic. So we started off talking about asexuality versus celibacy, and the point that I think we're all trying to make is that you want to honestly describe reality, and you need to understand. You need to investigate the deterministic nature of the universe to be able to accurately describe certain phenomena. So asexuality, celibacy, the definitions that Chandler researched and found, they're off because they show a lack of understanding of free will. Another good example is the issue with gay rights. So people will say, well, gay people don't choose to be gay. Well, there's a much stronger hammer blow you can use when you're a hard determinist. Gay people don't choose to be gay because no one chooses anything. You see, but it's true. That's why it's not. It's there. There really isn't much of a difference between someone who is uh, engaged in homosexual sexual behavior and someone who says, "Well, I'm engaged in that behavior, but I don't feel this way." Whatever. What you do is what you do. You are not in control of anything. So when you understand that, without that understanding, that's the real point. Without that understanding, it's very difficult, perhaps impossible, to accurately define and describe some key aspects of uh, of our social network. It's very. I don't see how one can really accurately talk about matters of politics and human well-being and science without an honest understanding of the way the universe works.
Yeah,
Yes.
whether it's crime or addiction or overweightness or whatever, to the extent we hold a free will, we're just completely missing, why we as people do what we do or not.
Yeah, and it keeps us from looking into it as well, because people just say, "Oh, well, this person chose their free will to do this or that. They chose to overeat. They chose to have sex before marriage. Therefore, we will blame them and punish them." But nobody ever looks to the causes because under free will there is no causality.
Yep.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, some people would claim there is, but yeah, I mean, it's incoherent.
Yeah, and there can't be randomness in free will either, making it even weirder. Because it's supposed to be up to you, not random, uncaused events.
Chandler, how are we on time?
Yeah, well, we're almost at 30 minutes, so I better close this one, I guess. Okay. You've been listening to Free Will, Science, and Religion. This has been Chandler Klebs, Mitch J, and George Ortega. We were talking about the definitions between, asexuality and celibacy, and how making a distinction that celibacy was a choice, whereas asexuality was not, is a wrong. It's not clear what that means, and we digging deep into the fact that nobody chooses anything. That's what our podcast is about. And I hope you've learned something from listening to this. Thank you for listening, and goodbye.